The sinking of the Titanic, 1912. The steel dream. At the turn of the 20th century, the world breathed progress. Steel, steam, and electricity marked a new era, and no human creation better symbolized this confidence than the RMS Titanic, the largest ship ever built. The vessel was a true floating colossus, over 260 meters long and designed to carry more than 2,200 people, including passengers and crew. The Titanic was the pride of the White Star Line, a British company that wanted to surpass its rival Cunard Line in luxury and grandeur. The ship was built in Belfast, Northern Ireland, over 3 years of hard work, with thousands of workers shaping tons of steel under the command of engineer Thomas Andrews. When it was completed in 1912, the Titanic was described by the press as unsinkable, a supreme symbol of human dominion over nature. According to its creators, its 16 watertight compartments would guarantee that even if 2 or 3 were flooded, the ship would still remain afloat. The interior was a spectacle in itself: monumental staircases, gilded halls, suites with luxurious furniture, and even a gymnasium with modern equipment for the time. First class brought together the elite of the planet: American millionaires, British aristocrats, industrialists, and artists. In the lower classes, immigrants traveled, full of hope, dreaming of a new life in America. On the afternoon of April 10, 1912, the Titanic departed from the port of Southampton, bound for New York, under the command of the experienced Captain Edward John Smith, on his retirement voyage. On board were more than 2,200 people, including names like John Jacob Astor IV, one of the richest men in the world, and Molly Brown, an American socialite who would later be known as the Unsinkable. In the first days of the voyage, everything seemed perfect. The sea was calm, the weather pleasant, and the Titanic sailed confidently, cutting through the North Atlantic at a steady speed. Passengers enjoyed banquets, orchestras, and refined conversations, unaware that, in the colder northern waters, a silent danger awaited them. As the ship progressed, messages began arriving from other vessels warning of icebergs. But the warnings were ignored or underestimated. It was believed that the Titanic was unsinkable and that nothing could threaten its glorious journey. On the night of April 14, 1912, fate began to change. The sea was incredibly calm and the sky clear and starry. Lookout Frederick Fleet, high in the mast, contemplated the horizon covered by a bluish twilight when he suddenly spotted something. "Iceberg, right ahead," he shouted. The alarm sounded. The helmsman turned the rudder with all his might. The Titanic began to list slowly, but the mass of ice was enormous. At 11:40 p.m., the ship's hull scraped violently against the iceberg. The metallic sound echoed through the corridors, and a shower of ice fell onto the bow deck. Most passengers barely felt the impact, but deep within the ship, water began to flood the forward compartments. The nightmare of the impossible was only beginning. The tragedy unfolds. When the impact occurred, the Titanic shuddered for a few seconds. Many passengers thought it was just a sudden maneuver. In the luxury cabins, some glasses fell and the noise was followed by silence. But, on the lower decks, the sound of water flooding the compartments began to echo furiously. Chief Engineer Thomas Andrews was quickly summoned. Upon inspecting the hull, he realized the scale of the disaster. The iceberg had breached 5 watertight compartments. The design guaranteed buoyancy if only 4 were damaged, but the 5th sealed the ship's fate. In a grave voice, Andrews murmured to Captain Smith, "The Titanic is going to sink. It's a matter of time." The crew went on alert. The boilers were shut down and the telegraph sent the distress message. QUD. QUD. This is the Titanic. We have collided with an iceberg. Minutes later, radio operator Jack Phillips repeated the new international code, SOS, used for the first time in a disaster of that magnitude. Meanwhile, in the lounges, the passengers were still unaware of the gravity of the situation. The orchestra continued to play, trying to calm the nerves. The officers asked for calm and said it was just a precaution. The captain ordered the lifeboats to be prepared, but there was a devastating problem. There were only enough lifeboats for half the people on board. The Titanic's architect, concerned with aesthetics and space, had reduced the number of lifeboats, something permitted by the naval laws of the time, which were based on the ship's weight, not the number of passengers. At midnight, the ship's list became noticeable. Water had already reached the lower deck, and the crew began evaluating women and children first. Panic began to spread as the first lifeboats were lowered with empty seats, as many did not believe the ship would actually sink. In the corridors of third class, the situation was desperate. Iron doors prevented quick access to the upper decks, and dozens of immigrant families struggled to escape the rapidly rising icy water. Meanwhile, on the upper deck, magnate John Jacob Astor IV helped his pregnant wife board a lifeboat. Musician Wallace Hartley, leader of the orchestra, gathered his colleagues and made a decision that would become legendary: to continue playing until the end. Around 1:30 a.m., the Titanic was already visibly listing. The engines were submerged, and the cold was biting. The water temperature was only -2 degrees Celsius, enough to cause hypothermia in minutes. The Californian, sailing less than 30 kilometers away, had its radio turned off and did not hear the distress calls. The Carpathia, another ship, responded, but was more than 3 hours away. At 2:10 a.m., few lifeboats remained. People jumped into the sea, desperately clutching wreckage. Screams echoed in the darkness. Captain Smith, steadfast on the bridge, was last seen entering the wheelhouse, disappearing along with the ship he commanded. The Titanic broke in two shortly before 2:20 a.m. on April 15, 1912. The sound of metal tearing through the ocean was deafening. Within minutes, the lights went out, and the steel colossus disappeared beneath the icy waters of the North Atlantic. More than 1,500 lives were lost that night, most swallowed by the cold and fate. The survivors, about 700 people, floated amidst wreckage and bodies, awaiting dawn and the hope of rescue. The sea was calm, and the silence that followed was described as the most terrible stillness ever heard. The dawn of tragedy. When the Titanic disappeared beneath the waters, the sea was covered with pieces of wood, suitcases, and hundreds of people floating, calling for help. The cold was relentless. The water temperature, near freezing, meant that most could not survive for more than 15 minutes. The few who managed to get into lifeboats looked back, stunned, listening to the cries gradually fade into the darkness. One witness, passenger Eva Hart, would recall decades later, "The screams were the most horrible thing I have ever heard." Then, silence. An absolute, deadly silence. Around 4 a.m., a light appeared on the horizon. It was the RMS Carpathia, the ship that had responded to the distress call hours earlier. Captain Arthur Rostron, driven by courage and a sense of duty, had ordered his crew to sail at maximum speed through the ice fields to arrive as quickly as possible. When the Carpathia finally reached the area, what it saw was a floating cemetery. Dawn revealed the extent of the tragedy: bodies floating, lifeboats scattered, and the sea still littered with wreckage. The first people rescued were in shock, many unable to speak. Some were still holding dead relatives. Aboard the Carpathia, survivors were welcomed with blankets, hot tea, and medical care. The ship did its best to offer comfort, but the trauma was profound. Among the survivors was Molly Brown, who helped organize the search for more survivors and distributed blankets and medicine. Her bravery would make her one of the most remembered figures of the tragedy. The Carpathia rescued 705 people alive. As it sailed toward New York, it sent telegrams reporting the disaster. The news spread rapidly, shocking the world. Newspapers in London, Paris, and New York featured headlines: "The Titanic sank, more than 1,500 dead." The arrival of the Carpathia in New York, at Pier 54, was marked by commotion. A crowd waited anxiously, searching for relatives and friends. A light rain fell when the survivors disembarked, covered in blankets and with empty stares. Investigations began soon. British and American commissions were formed to discover what had happened. The inquiry revealed human error, overconfidence, and negligence. Ignored warnings of icebergs, high speed, and an insufficient number of lifeboats were pointed to as direct causes of the catastrophe. The testimony of surviving radio operator Harold Bride moved everyone. "We kept sending messages until the very last moment. We knew the ship was lost, but we hoped someone would arrive in time. When I felt the deck rising, I jumped, and the sea took me." The Titanic disaster was more than an accident, it was a blow to human arrogance. The unsinkable ship sank on its maiden voyage, taking with it a blind faith in progress and technology. In response, new maritime rules were created: more mandatory lifeboats, constant radio surveillance, and ice patrols in the North Atlantic. The world learned, the hard way, that no machine is indestructible. Decades later, the tragedy would remain vivid in the collective memory and in the stories of those who survived, forever marked by a freezing night in the middle of the ocean. The legacy of the Titanic. As the days passed after the sinking, the entire world went into mourning. Churches rang bells, newspapers published lists of the dead and missing, and entire families were left without news. The Titanic, which had been a symbol of glory and modernity, now became synonymous with tragedy and humility before nature. Official investigations pointed to a sequence of human and technical errors: excessive speed in an area known for icebergs, ignored warnings, the lack of binoculars in the watchtower, and the absence of sufficient lifeboats. Blind faith in the motto "unsinkable" cost more than 1,500 lives. But the Titanic also revealed stories of courage and humanity. Crew members and passengers who, in the midst of despair, showed bravery. The engineer Thomas Andrews, last seen helping passengers, the musician Wallace Hartley and his orchestra, who played until the end to calm the others, Captain Smith, who remained at his post until he was swallowed by the sea. For decades, the location of the shipwreck remained a mystery. Many believed the ship would never be found. It was only in 1985, more than 70 years later, that an expedition led by oceanographer Robert Ballard located the wreckage at a depth of approximately 3,800 meters at the bottom of the North Atlantic. The first images shocked the world, the enormous hull covered in rust, plates, and personal belongings scattered across the seabed, all preserved like a time capsule. The ship had broken in two, exactly as the survivors reported. The discovery rekindled global interest in the story. Books, documentaries, and films were produced, culminating in James Cameron's iconic film Titanic, 1997, which brought the tragedy to a new generation and became one of the highest-grossing films in cinema history. But, behind the romance and fiction, the true human drama continued to echo, the suffering, the loss, and the lesson that the sea imposed on humanity. Today, the Titanic rests silently at the bottom of the ocean, slowly consumed by corrosion and time. Submarine expeditions visit the site cautiously, some bringing artifacts to museums, others arguing that the ship should remain untouched as an underwater memorial to the victims. The name Titanic has become more than a tragedy. It is a metaphor for human arrogance and the limits of technological power. It is a reminder that, even at the height of science and progress, nature remains sovereign. And when the cold currents of the Atlantic pass over the sleeping ship, it seems that the echo of that night still whispers in the depths. Iceberg ahead. Did you enjoy the story? Subscribe to the channel for more stories.